Enemy withdrawal, abandoning NLI bunkers. The silent end of Pakistan's Kargil gamble. When wars end, they rarely do so with ceremony. They end in silence, abandonment, and traces left behind by men who once believed that they would hold the ground forever. In the Kargil conflict of 1999, few images captured the true conclusion of Pakistan's intrusion as clearly as the abandonment of the Northern Light Infantry's NLI bunkers scattered across Batalik, Mushkoh Valley, and adjoining ridgelines show. These empty sangars, stones, and ice fortifications carved into cliffs stood as mute evidence of a strategic failed illusion. Unlike surrender documents or battlefield speeches, abandoned bunkers tell the truth without words. They reveal fear, exhaustion, logistical escape, and the moment when command authority disintegrates. In Kargil, the retreat from these positions marked the final psychological defeat of Pakistan's operation, long before the last intruder crossed back over the line of control. The myth of the permanent high ground. Pakistan's Kargil plan was built on a single dangerous assumption that once the high grounds were occupied during winter, they could be held indefinitely. NLI units trained for mountain warfare, accustomed to harsh conditions, were inserted into Indian territory under the cover of snow and silence. They constructed bunkers using stones, ice, timber, and camouflage netting, often reinforced with frozen earth that hardened like concrete. These were not temporary shelters, these were meant to be permanent. Each bunker was positioned to dominate Indian supply routes, especially NH1A, and to interlock fire with neighboring posts. Mortar pits were dug behind ridge lines, ammunition dumps were hidden in caves, winter rations were stockpiled months in advance. In theory, these sangars were designed to survive everything except a full scale assault. When Pakistani planners Pakistani planners underestimated wasn't Indian firepower but Indian persistence. The slow collapse of Indian positions. As Indian forces clawed back peak after peak, the psychological balance shifted. Each recaptured height exposed the next. Artillery observation posts fell into Indian hands. Fire began to rain not blindly but precisely. Bunkers that once felt invulnerable became death traps. The NLI units faced conditions far worse than anticipated. Resupply routes were severed by Indian artillery and air dominance. Helicopter support became impossible due to altitude and air defense threats. Casualty evacuation was nearly non existent. Food stocks froze, spoiled, or ran out. Ammunition expenditure exceeded resupply capacity. Commanders on the ground began making decisions in isolation. Radio contact was sporadical. Orders from headquarters became unrealistic, disconnected from terrain and reality. Some posts were ordered to hold at all costs without plan for relief. This is the moment where bunkers stop being positions of strength and become prisons. The withdrawal that was never meant to happen. Pakistan never planned for a withdrawal under fire. The operation assumed political leverage would force India to negotiate before military eviction became possible. When that assumption collapsed, under international pressure and the Indian battlefield success, the retreat had to be improvised, and improvised withdrawals leave traces. Abundant NLI bunkers reveal the nature of this retreat. Scattered ammunition, bales of machine gun rounds left behind, mortar shells abandoned because they were too heavy to carry downhill under fire, frozen rations, sealed packed foods left untouched, some half buried in snow, others ruptured by freeze thaw cycles. Discarded equipments, radios get sets smashed, documents burnt incompletely, helmets and webbing left behind to reduce weights. Footprint in melting snow. Clear trails leading downhill, often away from LOC in panic driven routes rather than planned withdrawal corridors. They were not orderly evacuations, they were survival retreats. The psychological meaning of an empty bunker. In military psychology, an abandoned position is more significant than a captured one. A position captured after a fight reflects strength on both sides. A position abandoned without resistance reflects collapse. The empty bunkers of Kargil told Indian commanders several critical truths. Enemy morale had broken. Troops do not abandon fortified high ground unless they believe holding it guarantees death. Command cohesion had failed. Coordination without withdrawal requires discipline. What was observed was fragmentation. Operational initiative had passed permanently. Once the enemy retreats from dominating terrain, the battlefield is effectively decided. These bunkers become markers not of Pakistani resilience but of Pakistani miscalculation. Tactical lessons written in stone and ice. From a purely military standpoint, these abandoned NLI bunkers provided the invaluable lesson. High ground dominance is meaningless without secure logistics. Winter occupation doesn't guarantee summer survival. Static defenses fail when the enemy controls artillery and observation. Political assumptions cannot substitute for military contingency planning. Indian forces documentaries these positions carefully, not for propaganda but for doctrine. These lessons shaped future mountain warfare planning, surveillance improvements, and forward deployment strategies. Symbolism without resilience. There is a temptation to romanticize abundant enemy positions, to frame them as trophies. The Indian Army largely resisted this impulse. These bunkers were treated with professionalism, studied, catalogued, and then destroyed on rendered unusable. unusable. Because every abandoned bunker also represents men who froze, bled, panicked, or died believing they were a part of decisive operation, only to be sacrificed to strategic hubris. There is no glory in it. Conclusion: the war ends when the enemy leaves. The Kargil War didn't end when the last press release was issued or when diplomacy forced Pakistan to retreat. It ended when Indian patrols found empty bunkers on ridgelines, once bristling with machine guns. Snow melting over boot prints, caves silent where radios once crackled. Weapons left behind because survival mattered more than orders. These abandoned Northern Light Infantry bunkers are the final chapter of Pakistan's Kargil gamble, not written in ink, but carved into rock, ice, and failure. Wars are not won only by seizing ground, they are won when the enemy decides the ground is no longer worth dying for. And in Kargil, that decision was made silently, inside abandoned bunkers high above the valleys below.